Welcome, and thank you for being here. This is the Sleep Science Channel. There are moments when loneliness arrives without an obvious cause, not because something ended, not because someone left, not because the room is empty. It comes quietly, often in ordinary moments, when nothing appears wrong. You may be going through your usual routines, speaking to people, answering messages, moving through your days with a sense of normality, and yet underneath all of that, there is a subtle distance, a feeling that something is missing, even though you cannot name what it is. This kind of loneliness can be confusing because it doesn't match the circumstances around you. You might hesitate to take it seriously, telling yourself that others have it worse, that there is no clear reason to feel this way. But the feeling persists, not loudly, not dramatically, just present enough to be noticed when everything else grows quiet. Often it shows up at night, when distractions fade and the mind begins to wander without direction. What you may be experiencing is not a lack of people, but a lack of connection in a deeper sense. Connection not only to others, but to yourself, to meaning, to a sense of being understood or aligned. Humans are social beings, but social contact alone does not always meet the brain's deeper need for resonance. The nervous system is not only looking for company, it is looking for safety, recognition, and emotional attunement. When those needs are unmet, even subtly, the brain can generate a feeling of loneliness without attaching it to a clear story. This is why the feeling can feel vague, almost atmospheric, like a low hum in the background of your life. You may try to fix it by staying busy, by scrolling, by filling silence with noise. Sometimes that helps briefly, often it does not. There are many pathways that lead to this kind of quiet loneliness. One of them is emotional self-silencing. Over time, many people learn to minimize their own inner experiences. They learn to be agreeable, capable, reliable. They become good at functioning, at meeting expectations, at holding themselves together. But in doing so, they may gradually lose touch with parts of themselves that need expression, softness, or acknowledgement. When those parts go unheard for long enough, the brain registers a form of internal isolation. Another pathway is prolonged stress. When the nervous system stays in a mildly activated state for too long, it can reduce the brain's capacity for emotional presence. You may still feel emotions, but they feel flattened or distant. This can create the sense that you are slightly removed from life, as if watching it through a pane of glass. Others may not notice this distance, but you feel it internally as a subtle separation. Loneliness can also arise during periods of transition, even positive ones. Growth, change, and adaptation require the brain to reorganize familiar patterns. During this process, old sources of meaning may no longer fit, while new ones have not yet formed. The space in between can feel empty, unanchored. The mind searches for what is missing, but finds no clear answer, only the sensation of absence itself. It's important to understand that this feeling is not a failure, and it is not a flaw. It is a signal, not a signal that something is wrong with you, but that something within you is asking for attention in a quiet, non-verbal way. The brain often communicates through feeling states before it communicates through clear thoughts. Loneliness without a clear reason is one of those early signals. As you listen, you don't need to solve this feeling tonight. There is nothing you need to figure out or fix. Simply noticing the experience without judgment already begins to change how the brain relates to it. Awareness softens the nervous system. Naming the feeling, even gently, tells the brain that it is not alone with its own experience. You may notice that when you stop resisting the feeling, it shifts slightly, not disappearing, but becoming less sharp, less isolating. This is because resistance often amplifies emotional signals, while acceptance allows them to move through the system more naturally. The goal is not to eliminate loneliness, but to understand what kind of loneliness this is and what it might be pointing toward. Sometimes this feeling is connected to a longing for authenticity, a desire to be seen as you truly are, not just as the version of yourself that functions well in the world. Other times, it reflects a need for rest, for emotional safety, for spaces where nothing is required of you. And sometimes it is simply the brain's way of slowing you down, inviting you inward after long periods of outward focus. As the body settles and your breathing becomes slower, you may allow these ideas to drift through your mind without effort. You don't need to hold on to them. Let them come and go, like thoughts passing across a quiet sky. The feeling you came here with does not need to be pushed away. It can rest alongside you without urgency. We will continue to explore this experience gently, looking at the many ways it can form, how the brain interprets it, and how it can soften over time. For now, simply stay here. Let the room be quiet. Let your body rest where it is. There is nothing you need to do and nothing you need to become in this moment. For many people, this form of loneliness doesn't begin with one clear moment. It begins in small, unnoticed steps. You stop sharing something minor because it feels easier not to explain it. You let a need pass because voicing it feels too vulnerable. You respond with, "I'm fine," even when you're not sure you are. And over time, those small decisions become a quiet pattern, one where less and less of your inner world is being mirrored back to you. You may not even realize it's happening, because on the surface, everything is still functioning. You're still you, still showing up, still helping, still laughing when appropriate. But beneath that, something begins to fade. Not your personality, but your emotional reflection. The sense that who you are inside is also visible outside. That someone, somewhere, gets it, even when you don't say it out loud. It's not about dramatic feelings. It's about subtle ones. The soft discomfort of being present, but not felt. Of participating in things, but always slightly from the edge. You can be included in everything and still feel like you're not really in it. This is where the confusion comes in. Because how do you explain a feeling that doesn't have a story? How do you talk about something when there's nothing specific to point to? You might even start to wonder if the feeling is real at all, or if you're just imagining it. That self-doubt is part of the experience too. Loneliness without cause often brings questions that have no clear answers. But the feeling is real, and it's more common than you might think. Many people carry it quietly, convinced they're the only ones. They go to work, they go to dinner, they smile. But inside, something feels one step removed. Not empty, just distant. And that distance doesn't always need to be fixed. Sometimes it needs to be named. When you name it, even privately, it becomes something you're allowed to feel instead of something you're constantly trying to explain away or hide. The brain responds to that. When you stop pretending the feeling isn't there, the nervous system can stop guarding against it. You might start to notice where this feeling shows up most. In conversations where you can't be fully honest. In relationships where the depth stays on the surface. In spaces where you're expected to be a role, not a person. And even when none of that is meant to hurt you, it still has an effect. Because emotional connection isn't just about love or kindness or presence. It's about resonance. About someone hearing what you're saying, even the parts between the words, and responding in a way that makes you feel like you exist in full color again. When that doesn't happen often, the world can feel slightly faded. Safe, maybe. Familiar. But also quiet in a way that leaves something unanswered. You may also notice that the people around you still care. But they may not notice the subtle changes in your tone, your pauses, your silences. They respond to your words, but not your energy. And so without even realizing it, you start to pull back emotionally. You still talk, still participate, but your inner world stops coming forward. Not to punish anyone, just because it feels like it won't quite land. Over time, this creates the shape of loneliness, not because you're alone, but because the parts of you that most need to be seen are quietly staying inside. This experience is especially common in people who have learned to keep themselves emotionally steady for the sake of others. You may be the one people count on, the one who doesn't overreact, the one who listens calmly, gives thoughtful advice, holds it all together. And over time, that role becomes a kind of emotional default. You stop sharing the messier feelings, not because you don't feel them, but because you've been conditioned to make space for everyone else first. It's not about pretending. It's about adapting. Adapting so well that even you forget how much you've edited yourself. You stay agreeable to avoid tension. You keep things light to keep others comfortable. And somewhere in all of that, your own emotional reality becomes quiet. Not erased, just pushed to the background. But the body keeps track. The nervous system knows when emotional expression has been paused for too long. It registers the missing connection, not as sadness or panic, but as a vague, persistent feeling that something is off. You don't always notice it during the day. It often comes forward at night in stillness, when there's nothing left to distract you. That's when the questions return, not big dramatic ones, just soft, uncertain thoughts. Is this it? Am I really okay? Do people know who I actually am? Not because anything bad has happened, but because you've gone so long without showing the full picture that you've started to forget what it feels like to be truly seen. You might still have good conversations, laughter, even love. But emotional visibility isn't always about closeness. It's about accuracy, about someone seeing the real tone beneath your voice, the real weight behind your silence, and responding in a way that says, I know you didn't say it out loud, but I still hear it. When those moments are rare, loneliness grows. Not in one big wave, just slowly, quietly, over time. And because there's no crisis, no conflict, you tell yourself it's fine. You focus on what's going well. You remind yourself to be grateful. You list all the reasons why you shouldn't feel the way you do. But the feeling doesn't care about that. It keeps showing up in the pauses, in the low energy, in the quiet resistance to small talk, in the way you sometimes want connection but feel too tired to reach for it. That kind of tired isn't physical, it's emotional. The tiredness of always having to manage what you feel before you express it. The tiredness of always having to check, will this be understood? Will this be too much? So eventually you stop asking the questions. You stop expecting certain responses. You shrink your emotional language down to what feels safe. But something in you still notices the gap, even if you can't explain it, even if you keep going through your day, doing what you need to do. Something in the background continues to register that a part of you is left out of your own life. That is the kind of loneliness that doesn't need a reason. It builds in the space between being present and being known. One of the hardest parts about this kind of loneliness is that it doesn't always respond to connection the way you'd expect. You can spend time with people, you can be included, you can even have meaningful conversations, and still the feeling lingers. That's because it's not about presence. It's about depth. It's not about how many people are in your life, but about how much of you is actually brought into the open when you're with them. You can be surrounded by people who care about you and still feel unseen. Not because they're doing something wrong, but because the part of you that most needs recognition has become so quiet, so careful, so subtle. It doesn't always come forward even when given the chance. Maybe it used to. Maybe there was a time when you were more expressive, more emotionally open, more willing to share what you were feeling. But if those experiences were ever met with misunderstanding, judgment, or indifference, the nervous system remembers. It protects you by creating distance, not in a dramatic way, but in a protective, automatic way. You start saying less, feeling less in the presence of others, editing yourself without even realizing it. And it's not because you don't trust people. Sometimes you do. But trusting someone doesn't always mean you feel safe enough to be fully emotionally visible. That level of safety is rare. It takes more than time or shared history. It takes resonance. The feeling that who you are, even in your uncertainty or contradiction, is welcome. Without that, your inner world starts to become something you carry alone, even when life is full, even when things are going well. You begin to experience a private emotional layer that no one else quite sees. And when that becomes the norm, it can make the world feel distant, even when it's right in front of you. This is the kind of loneliness that feels invisible, not loud enough to interrupt your day, but present enough to blur the edges of your experience. You start to notice that you're rarely surprised anymore, not by joy, not by connection. Everything feels like a version of something you've already lived through. Predictable, safe, but slightly dull. And here's something that often goes unsaid. It's possible to feel this way and still care deeply about others, still love them, still enjoy their company. But emotional loneliness isn't about how you feel toward others. It's about how much of yourself you feel is seen by them. And when that balance is off, the mind notices. Not with panic, not with blame, just with that low, persistent feeling that something's missing and has been for a while. You don't always realize how long it's been since you felt truly known until something or someone interrupts the pattern. A rare moment of deep connection, a conversation that catches you off guard, a piece of music or writing that somehow says exactly what you didn't know you were trying to feel. And in that moment, the contrast becomes clear. You remember what it's like to feel emotionally alive again, and you realize how long it's been since you felt that way. This doesn't mean something is wrong with your life. It just means a part of you is overdue for expression. A part of you that has learned to stay small, to be pleasant, to be independent, to be low maintenance. All of that may have helped you survive, even thrive, in certain environments. but it can also leave you feeling strangely disconnected from your own depth. And that's what this kind of loneliness often points to. A need not just to be around people, but to be fully in yourself again, without having to hide, perform, or reduce anything to be accepted. There's also something important to acknowledge about the pressure to be okay. It runs deep, especially if you're someone who has learned to adapt quickly, to keep functioning no matter what's going on inside. Over time, people come to expect your steadiness. They rely on it, and so do you. It becomes part of your identity, and being the calm one, the strong one, the one who doesn't need much. And maybe you've worn that role for so long that you don't even question it anymore. But underneath, it can come with a cost. Because the longer you go without naming your own emotional needs, the more invisible they become, first to others, then to yourself. You stop checking in. You stop feeling the subtle shifts inside you. Not because you don't care, but because you've trained yourself to look outward, to prioritize stability, to avoid causing waves, and eventually a quiet kind of loneliness grows. Not from isolation, but from emotional self-abandonment. It's hard to notice, because you've learned to carry it well. You still show up, you still smile, you still offer warmth and care. But deep down, there's a version of you that hasn't been invited into the room for a long time. A version that's maybe more tired, more honest, less filtered, and it waits silently for some sign that it's safe to come back. Sometimes you don't realize how much you've internalized this emotional suppression until someone says, "You seem quiet lately," and you're not sure how to answer because you don't feel sad. You don't feel anything dramatic. You just feel a little less there, a little less available to your own life. That numbness isn't always a sign of something going wrong. It's often a sign of long-term overregulation, of staying emotionally composed for so long that your system forgets what it's like to feel without controlling it. Loneliness in this sense is not about needing more people. It's about needing more internal space to feel again, without pressure or purpose. And when you don't have that space, when every part of your life requires you to be focused, balanced, useful, the more spontaneous parts of you begin to disappear. The curiosity, the softness, the parts that speak without overthinking. The parts that don't care whether something makes sense, only that it's real. This is why loneliness can creep in even when everything seems fine. Because it's not about the structure of your life. It's about how much of your emotional self has been allowed to remain visible inside that structure. It doesn't mean you're emotionally closed off. It just means you've learned to survive in environments where being open came with risk, or where openness wasn't met with enough presence to make it feel worth it. So now you carry the habit of being okay. You answer, "I'm good," automatically. You say not much when someone asks what's on your mind, and you wonder why your own experience feels like it's happening behind a glass wall. That wall is subtle. It doesn't block everything. It just mutes things slightly. You laugh, but it doesn't go as deep. You connect, but you don't feel fully met. You care, but it feels like something's in the way. And after a while, that dullness becomes normal. You forget what it felt like to be emotionally clear, where nothing was hidden, and you didn't have to translate your feelings into something smaller just to be heard. This is where emotional loneliness thrives, in the quiet spaces between being understood and being guessed at, in the difference between being tolerated and being felt. You may still be loved, still appreciated, still needed, but something inside you knows the difference, and that knowing, however quiet, never fully goes away. Sometimes this kind of loneliness is not even about other people at all. It's about time, about how long it's been since you last felt fully connected to yourself. You move through life day after day, doing what needs to be done. You respond to messages. You show up where you're expected. You handle things. You manage. And slowly, your life becomes made up of obligations, not moments. You start to notice that your thoughts are always about the next thing, that you can't remember the last time you did something just because it felt good, not because it was productive or useful or expected. You keep going, but the experience of being in your own life feels further away. This is the part most people don't talk about, that you can feel lonely, even in your own body, even in your own mind. Not because you're out of touch with reality, but because the emotional tone of your life has gone quiet. Not from sadness, just from repetition, from the lack of something that surprises you, something that feels new. Even if it's small, it's hard to explain because you're still functioning. Everything looks okay, maybe even better than okay. But you can feel the lack of color in your experience, the lack of emotional depth, like a song that's playing, but too quietly to really feel. This is where the deeper kind of loneliness lives. Not in the absence of people, but in the absence of emotional vitality. You might still care about things, still want things, but the wanting feels muted, like you're watching someone else live your life on your behalf, and you're just following along. And the hardest part? You might not know how to get back to yourself, because nothing's wrong. There's nothing to fix, nothing to point to and say, that's the problem. Which means there's no clear solution either. Just a quiet recognition that something has drifted, slowly, silently, and now feels hard to reach. It's not always about trauma. It's not always about emotional wounds. Sometimes it's just the natural erosion that happens when life becomes too predictable, too managed, too safe. The very things that make a life stable can also make it emotionally quiet. And that quiet, over time, starts to feel like distance. Some people try to solve it by adding more. More activity, more goals, more connection, and sometimes that helps. But only if what's added brings something real, something that speaks directly to the part of you that's gone quiet. Because you can be surrounded by people, immersed in activity, and still feel like something essential is missing. That something is not easy to define. It's not always passion or purpose. Sometimes it's as simple as feeling emotionally awake again, like your inner world is in motion, responding, engaging, feeling, instead of just observing. It's a strange kind of grief when you realize you've gone numb to your own life. Not a loud grief, just the quiet ache of noticing how long it's been since something felt real enough to move you. And that grief often doesn't show up as sadness. It shows up as disconnection, as stillness, as the inability to name what you feel because nothing feels strong enough to hold a name. You drift, not because you want to, but because there's nothing pulling you back to center. That's why this kind of loneliness is so misunderstood. People think it means you're missing others. But sometimes it means you're missing you. What makes this experience so complex is that it doesn't always feel urgent. It doesn't demand your attention. It doesn't crash in like anxiety or sadness might. It waits. It lives in the background. And because of that, it's easy to ignore until it isn't. You may not even realize how much you've adapted to the feeling until something shifts. A song that hits you harder than expected. A memory that comes back with more weight than usual. A quiet moment where there's nothing left to distract you. And suddenly there it is. The awareness that you've been missing something, even if you don't know what. Sometimes the realization arrives slowly. You notice that your responses have become automatic, that you're going through the motions, that your laughter feels polite more than real, that you crave time alone, not for peace, but because it's the only time you don't have to manage how you appear. That's one of the key signs of this quiet loneliness, emotional performance. The feeling that you need to show up a certain way, speak a certain way, carry yourself a certain way, because that's what keeps everything smooth. Even if you're not trying to impress anyone, even if you trust the people around you, the pressure is still there, internal, silent, and constant. You may not feel like you're hiding, but you might feel like the realest parts of you don't belong in everyday life. So they stay quiet. And you become someone who's always slightly edited, slightly refined, slightly removed from the rawness of your own experience. Over time, this can wear on you, not in obvious ways, but in small ones. You feel more tired, more indifferent, more disconnected from the people and things you care about. It's not depression, it's not burnout, it's something else, something harder to name and easier to ignore. But your body knows. Your nervous system knows. It starts sending you signals in moments you don't expect. A heaviness when you wake up. A blankness during conversations. A strange ache when you finally have free time and realize you don't know what to do with it. These are not signs of failure. They are signs of something internal asking to be acknowledged. And often the thing that's missing isn't external. It's not more people. It's not more validation. It's emotional freedom. The freedom to feel without filtering, to be without adjusting, to speak without checking if your truth is too much for the room. That freedom is rare. And if you've gone years or even a lifetime staffed without it, loneliness becomes the normal state. Not dramatic, not destructive, just quiet and constant. A subtle sense that you're not quite with yourself, even as you keep living your life. This kind of emotional loneliness often hides behind high-functioning behavior, behind productivity, behind helpfulness, behind being someone others can rely on. And the more people praise you for how capable you are, the harder it becomes to admit how alone you sometimes feel inside that role. But the truth is, loneliness doesn't care how well you're doing. It doesn't care how loved you are, or how supported, or how admired. It only cares about truth, about how much of your emotional experience gets to exist freely without needing to be cleaned up before it's seen. And when that truth stays hidden for too long, the result isn't always sadness. Sometimes it's just a flatness, a loss of color, of intensity, of connection. You become someone who feels everything and nothing at the same time. Someone who's in the room, but not entirely there. And maybe that's the hardest part. When no one else notices, when everyone still sees you the same way, when your smile still works and your voice still sounds fine and the outside never gives away what's happening inside. That's why this feeling is hard to talk about, because from the outside there's nothing to see. One of the more painful aspects of this kind of loneliness is realizing how hard it is to let people in, even when you want to. You might catch yourself holding back in small moments. A conversation opens a door, but you step around it. Someone asks how you really are, and you answer honestly, but only up to a point. Not because you're lying, but because vulnerability starts to feel unfamiliar, maybe even risky, especially if you're not sure what someone would do with your full truth, whether they would meet it with care or just move on, not realizing what you were offering in that moment. And so you choose safety. You keep it light, you keep it pleasant, and afterward you feel a little more alone than before. Not because the other person failed you, but because you didn't give them the chance not to. That's the cycle. You long to be seen, but you don't show the parts of you that actually need seeing. You crave depth, but you only offer the version of yourself you know is digestible. You want connection, but you filter yourself so much that even when it happens, it doesn't really reach the part of you that feels alone. This pattern doesn't come out of nowhere. It's learned, often over years, sometimes from childhood, sometimes from relationships that taught you directly or indirectly that your feelings were too much, that your thoughts needed to be clearer, that your needs had to come second, so you became more careful, more thoughtful, more emotionally efficient. You learned how to read the room, how to sense what's appropriate, how to adjust your tone to match the moment. And slowly, your emotional expression became more about maintaining peace than sharing your truth. And you've probably been praised for it. People admire your emotional intelligence, your self-awareness, your ability to stay calm. But beneath all of that, something real has been quieted. Something that doesn't want to be reasonable, something that wants to be known, even when it's messy or inconvenient or doesn't come out the right way. When that part of you doesn't get to speak, you can feel the loss, even if you don't fully understand it. It shows up in small hesitations, in conversations that feel fine but leave you empty, in the way you check your words before saying them, not out of fear but out of habit. And it doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it just feels like your own emotions are happening in another room. You know they're there, you can hear them, but you're not inside with them. You're nearby, observing, translating, explaining, but not really feeling them fully anymore. That's the shape loneliness can take. Not silence, but separation. A life that continues, a voice that speaks, a body that moves, all of it intact, but with a sense that your emotional self is standing a few steps behind you, waiting for something that never quite arrives. And the longer that distance lasts, the more your system normalizes it. You stop expecting emotional closeness. You stop noticing the absence until something reminds you. A moment of real resonance, a sentence that lands in your chest. A night where, for no reason at all, the ache becomes louder than usual. And you remember, this isn't who you really are. It's just who you've had to become to keep everything working. That realization isn't always painful. Sometimes it's the beginning of return. A quiet kind of return. Not to anyone else, but to yourself. This kind of return to your own emotional self doesn't happen all at once, and it's not dramatic. There's no sudden breakthrough. It often begins in moments that look small on the outside. A pause in conversation, a sentence you don't edit before saying. A night where you let the silence be what it is instead of filling it. The shift is subtle, but inside it matters. Because every time you allow even a fraction more of your real self to be present, without softening it, without polishing it, your system notices. It doesn't need applause. It just needs truth. Loneliness without a clear reason often begins when that truth gets buried under all the ways you've had to be functional, all the ways you've had to be composed, all the ways you've kept things light to protect others, or to keep things running, or to avoid the long explanation that never seems to land anyway. And over time, you may have started to confuse emotional invisibility with emotional safety. You feel safer when you don't have to explain yourself. You feel calmer when no one's asking too many questions. You feel more in control when you're not reaching for something you're not sure you'll receive. But emotional control isn't the same thing as connection, and a life built around managing your inner world can eventually leave you feeling like you're living at a distance from it. That's where the emptiness begins. Not because you don't feel, but because you've grown used to containing everything, to feeling it privately, if at all. And when feelings are never seen, never spoken, never reflected back, they start to lose their shape. You still carry them, but they live in silence, and that silence can feel like a kind of disappearance. Maybe you've stopped expecting people to really get you. Not out of bitterness, just out of experience. You've learned that most people hear the surface, not the subtext, so you give them the surface. And when it doesn't satisfy you, you tell yourself, that's just how life is, but every now and then that quiet need still speaks. The one that wants to be heard without explanation, that wants to be met without effort, that wants to be felt in full without the layers of interpretation that usually come first. That need isn't weakness, it's not immaturity, it's human, and it doesn't go away just because you've learned to live without it. It waits, it watches, and sometimes in the middle of a quiet night or a still moment, it reminds you that you're still here. That underneath all the strength, the calm, the control, there's still a real, living, inner world that wants to be part of your life again. Reconnecting with that part of yourself doesn't require grand emotional gestures. It starts with honesty, not performative honesty. Just the quiet kind, the kind where you admit to yourself, I feel alone, even if nothing looks wrong. The kind where you say, I miss myself. Without needing to follow it with a solution, that's how emotional presence begins again. Not with big conversations, not with a sudden change. Just with a few small truths that no longer need to be hidden. And once those truths return, the loneliness starts to shift, not vanish, not resolve, just shift. Because now you're not abandoned in it, you're with yourself in it. And that changes everything. One of the most misunderstood things about loneliness is that it doesn't always mean you want company. Sometimes you don't want to talk to anyone. You don't want to go out. You don't want more noise or interaction. What you want, or what a deeper part of you wants, is connection that feels real. And when you know that most interactions won't reach that level, it's easier to stay quiet, to stay alone. But that decision, repeated over time, starts to reshape your emotional life. You tell yourself you're just resting, that you're tired, that you're recharging, and sometimes you are. But sometimes what you're really doing is protecting yourself from the disappointment of being with others and still feeling unseen. It's not that you've given up on people. It's just that you've grown cautious, careful. You've seen how easy it is to be misunderstood. Even when your words are clear, you've experienced the kind of silence that follows when you say something honest and the other person doesn't know what to do with it. And so you start offering less, not out of anger, but out of emotional efficiency. You stop opening certain doors. You stop naming certain feelings. You keep conversations comfortable. You keep your responses within safe limits. And after a while, no one sees what you've kept inside, not even you. That's what makes emotional loneliness so hard to address. You forget where it started. You forget how you ended up feeling this separate from your own life. You only know that the connection you want feels further away than it used to. And the longer you live without it, the more it starts to feel like maybe it's not something you're meant to have. But that's not true. It's not that connection is unavailable. It's that your nervous system, wisely, protectively, has started to believe it's safer to live without it. And that belief, even when unconscious, shapes everything. It tells you to stay quiet, to stay light, to stay manageable. What often brings that belief into awareness is contrast, a moment of unexpected resonance, a deep conversation that doesn't feel forced, a voice that says something you've never heard out loud, but always felt. In that moment, something inside you stirs, and you realize, even if only for a second, that the connection you've been craving does exist. You just haven't been around it in a long time. That realization is painful and beautiful at the same time, because it doesn't just reveal what's missing, it reveals what's possible. And once something is possible, even a little, it becomes harder to settle for absence. You might not know how to find that kind of connection on command. Most people don't. But the fact that your system still responds to it means you haven't lost the part of you that knows how to connect. It's just been waiting. It's just been quiet. It's just been protecting itself. So if the feeling of loneliness shows up again tomorrow, and it might, you don't need to fear it. You don't need to push it away. You can recognize it for what it is. A sign that your inner world is still alive, still reaching, still capable of wanting something deeper. That is not a weakness. It's a sign that your emotional self hasn't given up. And that's more powerful than it sounds. Because the moment you stop pretending you don't care, the moment you admit, even silently, that you want more emotional closeness, more resonance, more truth, that's the moment the loneliness begins to shift from something that isolates you to something that guides you. Sometimes the reason loneliness is so difficult to resolve is because you've gone so long without being met emotionally that you've stopped expecting it altogether. Not in a bitter way, just in a quiet, resigned way. You stop scanning for moments of depth. You stop waiting for someone to ask the real questions. You stop imagining that anyone will see what you've chosen not to show. And it's not because you don't want to be seen. It's because you've learned that most people don't notice. Not because they're unkind, but because they're distracted, busy, caught up in their own filters. And after enough experiences like that, the brain adapts. It says, don't risk the opening if no one knows what to do with it. So you become more internal, not necessarily closed off, but inward. You begin to live more in your head. You think deeply, feel things fully, but you don't always bring them out. You wait for moments that feel safe enough, meaningful enough, real enough. And when those moments don't come, you just hold it all in, quietly, consistently. And this is where emotional loneliness becomes less of a state and more of a lifestyle. You're still connected, still active, still present. But there's a part of you, maybe the truest part, that rarely sees daylight. You start to protect it like something fragile. Not because it is fragile, but because experience has taught you it's not always understood. And over time, that protection becomes a habit. One that works, one that keeps things smooth, but also one that slowly pulls you away from the deeper parts of your own life. You might not even realize how much of yourself you've placed in emotional storage. You're still you, but edited, cropped, compressed. And when the people around you respond to that smaller version, it reinforces the idea that it's all you're allowed to show, that your full range would be too much, too unclear, too complicated. But that's a belief, not a truth. And the problem with that belief is that it makes loneliness feel permanent, like it's part of who you are, instead of something that's grown out of patterns that made sense at the time. Patterns that protected you, patterns that maybe even saved you, but that now keep you slightly out of reach from your own emotional reality. This is why some people say they feel homesick, but not for a place or a person, just for a feeling they can't quite name. That's what emotional invisibility does. It creates a longing not just to be close to others, but to be known by yourself again. To stop feeling like everything is being lived through a filter. The solution isn't to start oversharing, or to force vulnerability, or to try to make others understand something they may not have the tools for. The solution, if you can even call it that, is to start noticing what's been silenced. What parts of you used to come forward more easily? What moments felt real before everything had to be managed? Even just that noticing without pressure, without judgment, starts to bring something back online. A kind of quiet reconnection, a return to the idea that your full self isn't too much or too hard to access. It's just been waiting for the invitation. And maybe that's where you begin, not with trying to explain yourself to others, but with stopping the habit of hiding from yourself. It's strange how easy it is to become a stranger to yourself, not in dramatic ways, not because you've changed so much, but because you've stopped being in close contact with who you actually are beneath everything you do. You still function, you still respond, you still care. But when you pause long enough to check in, you're not entirely sure what's in there anymore. You start to realize that your life is built around expectations. Your own, other people's, the ones you absorbed without meaning to. And somewhere in the process of meeting those expectations, something personal faded, something unfiltered, something spontaneous. It didn't disappear, it just got quiet. This is how emotional loneliness often starts. Not with distance from others, but with distance from your own experience. You live next to yourself instead of inside yourself. You narrate your emotions instead of actually feeling them. You reflect, you analyze, you explain, but you rarely stop and let the raw version speak. And it's not because you're cold or closed or broken. It's because somewhere along the way, that level of emotional presence stopped feeling useful or safe or allowed. So your system did what it had to do. It adapted, it streamlined, it protected you. But protection comes with a cost. The more you protect yourself from being hurt, the more you end up also shielding yourself from being reached. The wall doesn't know how to filter. It keeps everything out. And after a while, the inside gets quieter. You might start noticing the signs. You check your phone more often, but nothing really grabs you. You go to respond to a message, but you don't know what to say. You look forward to time alone, but when it arrives, It doesn't feel restful. It feels blank. These are the small ways emotional distance makes itself known. The hard part is that it builds slowly, and by the time you recognize it, the pattern feels permanent. You can't remember the last time you felt excited to connect, or moved by something simple, or surprised by a moment of closeness. Everything feels like a version of what you've already known. This is why emotional loneliness doesn't always feel painful, just low level and endless. Like you're waiting for something to click back into place, but you can't name what that something is. You start to wonder if maybe this is just adulthood. Maybe this is just how it feels to be functional. Maybe everyone else feels the same and they've just learned to stop thinking about it. But even when you tell yourself that, something in you doesn't fully believe it. Because you remember. Even if it was long ago, you remember what it felt like to be emotionally awake, to be moved, to be seen. That memory is not just nostalgia, it's a signpost. It tells you that the part of you that wants that kind of connection still exists. It hasn't been lost, it's just been waiting for you to notice that it never really left. You don't need to chase some past version of yourself or rewrite your life. But you might need to pause and ask a quieter question. What part of me has been left behind? Not in a dramatic way, just in the slow, invisible way that happens when survival becomes more important than presence. That question doesn't always have an answer right away, but asking it gently, honestly, is how you begin to return. What often surprises people when they begin to reconnect with themselves is how emotional the process can be, not because something dramatic happens, but because so much of it has nothing to do with words. The moment you stop performing calmness, stop narrating your thoughts, stop trying to stay composed, something old surfaces, not broken, not dark, just quiet and deeply human. You might notice it during a song you've heard 100 times and suddenly it hits differently, or in a moment of stillness when your mind, for once, doesn't reach for your phone. It just stays where it is. And in that space, something unfamiliar returns, a kind of emotional clarity, a sense that you haven't really felt yourself in a long time. Not because you've been numb, but because you've been efficient. You've lived through to-do lists, conversations, responsibilities, roles. You've kept things moving, you've stayed composed. But presence isn't the same as performance. And eventually, your body knows the difference. That's the quiet truth beneath emotional loneliness. You can be present in your life, yet entirely absent from your emotional experience. You can do everything right and still feel wrong inside. Not broken, just incomplete. And maybe you've learned to stop noticing, because noticing means reckoning with how long it's been like this, and you're not sure what would change if you admitted it out loud. But honesty doesn't always lead to action. Sometimes it just leads to softness, a moment where you don't have to prove anything, where you don't have to make sense, where you can feel the ache without explaining it, where you don't fix yourself. You just find yourself again for a moment. That moment is enough, because it reminds your system what it feels like to be in something, to be fully inside your own skin, not performing calmness, not maintaining stability, just feeling what's already there. You might not be able to live in that space all the time. Life still asks things of you. People still need you. The world still moves fast. But if you can return to yourself, even once in a while, something shifts. The loneliness becomes less constant, less sharp, less defining, because now you're not invisible to yourself anymore. And slowly, That internal shift changes how you move through the rest of the world. You stop chasing conversations that never go deeper. You stop pretending lightness when you need something heavier. You stop saying, "I'm fine," when what you really mean is, "I don't know yet." That doesn't make everything easier, but it makes it realer. And in a world that often rewards surface and speed, choosing realness, even quietly, is a form of return. Loneliness then becomes a signal, not a sentence, not a flaw, just a signpost that says, you've gone too long without being fully in your own life. And that's something you can respond to, not with urgency, but with gentleness. You don't need to explain your way out of it. You just need to notice where the silence began. And then, little by little, speak again, even if it's only to yourself. Sometimes what deepens the loneliness isn't just the lack of connection. It's the quiet belief that no one would understand, even if you tried. You play out the conversations in your mind before they ever happen. You imagine the responses, the nodding, the change of subject, the polite encouragement, and you tell yourself, what's the point? Not because you don't want to be heard, but because you've stopped believing that saying what you really feel will make a difference. So you shrink the truth. You make it simpler, lighter, easier to carry in public. You speak in edited versions of yourself, and people respond to what you've presented, not what you've withheld. And their response reinforces the idea that maybe your inner world really is too complex, too quiet, too much. But here's the thing, it's not. It's just unfamiliar. Most people don't live with emotional depth at the front of their lives. They touch it occasionally in moments of grief, of love, of stillness, but they don't stay there. So when you do, when your reality is shaped by reflection and nuance and unspoken emotion, it's easy to feel like you're out of sync with the rest of the world. But you're not. You're just paying attention to something others often avoid, and that doesn't make you too much. It makes you aware. And awareness, the emotional awareness especially, is not the problem. It's part of the reason you feel things fully and notice what others miss, carry more than you show. It's also part of why loneliness hits harder for you than it might for someone else. Because you're aware enough to feel the gap, even when everything looks fine on the outside. That doesn't mean you're doomed to carry it alone, but it does mean you may need to stop waiting for others to initiate that kind of depth. You may need to lead with it, not loudly, not all at once, but in small, honest ways. Saying what's actually true, even if it feels awkward. Naming what's been left out of the conversation. Letting someone see the part of you that usually stays quiet. Not everyone will meet you there. That's the reality. Some people won't know how, some won't want to, but some will. And those moments, rare as they may be, are often enough to remind you that connection is still possible. That the version of you who feels deeply and speaks softly and notices everything doesn't have to stay hidden to be accepted. It's a slow process. Building trust, letting people in, but sometimes the first step isn't about trusting someone else. It's about trusting yourself enough to stop minimizing your experience, to stop brushing it aside with logic, to stop comparing it to others who seem more in need, to simply say, what I feel is real, even if no one else sees it yet. That's where the shift begins. Not in the world outside you, but in the space between awareness and self-permission, between noticing the loneliness and no longer apologizing for it. You are allowed to feel disconnected. You are allowed to want more. You are allowed to miss something that doesn't have a name. The hardest part about carrying a loneliness you can't explain is how invisible it becomes, even to you. You learn to live with it like background noise. You build routines around it. You work through it. You socialize through it. You laugh through it. And for the most part, no one would ever guess. You might even forget that it's there until the stillness brings it back. A quiet afternoon, an unplanned evening, a canceled call, a walk without distraction. These small moments, so ordinary on the surface, become the places where the feeling comes forward. Not because you summoned it, but because there was finally enough silence for it to speak. It says very little. That's what makes it so hard to grasp. It doesn't come with a message or a memory. It doesn't offer you reasons or clarity. It's just there. A soft sense that something's missing and has been for longer than you realized. And yet, because you're functioning, you keep going. You don't make a big deal out of it. You might bring it up in passing. You might mention that you've been feeling a bit off, but you don't dig deeper. You've done that before. You've tried to explain it, and either people didn't understand or they offered solutions that didn't help. So now you just manage it. Quietly, internally, consistently. This is how emotional self-containment works. You stop asking to be seen. You stop inviting others into the places they never really entered anyway, and eventually you build a whole life around appearing fine, capable, low maintenance. And that's the version people respond to. They tell you how grounded you are, how thoughtful, how strong, and they mean it. But part of you knows that it's not the whole picture, that strength has come at a cost, that somewhere along the way your ability to be emotionally low impact has made your inner world feel unreachable, even to you. That's where the real ache begins, not just from the disconnection, but from the consistency of it. You realize it's not just something you feel now and then, it's something that's shaped how you live, how you speak, how you relate, and you wonder how much of you is actually showing up in your own life. That question doesn't always come with answers, but it does come with awareness. And awareness, even when uncomfortable, is the first thing that breaks the pattern. It doesn't fix it. It doesn't rush you. It just says, this is happening. And that truth on its own matters. Because once you see the pattern, you can begin to shift how you move inside it. You can notice where you hold back, where you soften yourself to keep things simple, where you avoid opening up because it's easier to be the one who listens. And maybe, just maybe, you pause. You choose not to skip over the real answer. You decide to let a little more of yourself speak, even if the room doesn't know what to do with it. Not because you expect to be fully understood, but because you're tired of not being fully there. You don't need to force the shift. You don't need to solve the loneliness in one conversation. But you can stop pretending it's not part of your experience. And sometimes that's where the change begins. There's a moment many people reach, quietly and without warning, where they realize they've been performing closeness without actually feeling it. You respond to messages. You say the right things. You show up, participate, listen, laugh. But afterward, there's no afterglow, no warmth, just a sense that you were there physically but emotionally. Not really. You start to notice it in small ways. Conversations that feel complete on the outside but leave you feeling flat. Time spent with others that should have been nourishing but wasn't. Smiles that come automatically but don't linger. And slowly you realize the connection is happening, but it's not reaching the part of you that needs it most. That part, the deeper emotional self, doesn't want more interaction. It wants more realness, more honesty, more resonance. It doesn't need constant validation. It doesn't need grand gestures. It just wants to feel like you're actually in the moment, not managing it. When that deeper part of you is consistently bypassed, you start to drift away from yourself. Not on purpose, not dramatically, just slowly. You become someone who's always slightly out of focus, even when everything around you is sharp. And the world rarely notices, because what it sees is someone who's present, who's capable, who's fine. And maybe you are fine, just not all the way through. There's a layer of you that hasn't been touched in a long time, a layer that remembers what it felt like to be known without effort, felt without explanation. That's often where emotional loneliness begins. Not when people leave, but when presence stops feeling personal. When you're still included but no longer felt. When the emotional thread that used to run through your life goes missing and you don't even realize it's gone until everything feels slightly more distant. And maybe you try to fix it. You reach out more. You make plans. You talk. You try to name it. But the more you try, the more the gap stays. Because what you're missing isn't external. It's internal. It's the sense that you are still in your own life in a full emotional way. Not just performing closeness, but actually feeling it. That's why more connection doesn't always help. It's not about more. It's about different. It's about removing the layers of performance you didn't know you were carrying. The way you hold your tone, the way you shape your words, the way you make sure you don't take up too much emotional space. It takes energy to do that. And that's what leaves you so tired. Not the loneliness itself, but the work of constantly managing your presence so that the real you doesn't feel exposed. But you don't have to keep doing that forever. You're allowed to be a little less polished, a little more unfiltered, a little more open, even if the people around you don't always meet you there. Sometimes the act of showing up more fully is less about being received and more about reclaiming your own voice. And when that happens, something changes. You begin to feel more in yourself again, even if the loneliness is still present. Because now you're not abandoning yourself in the process of managing others. You're returning slowly, quietly, and on your own terms. Sometimes the return to yourself begins with frustration. You notice how drained you feel after ordinary things, how small interactions feel heavier than they should, how a conversation that used to flow now feels like work. And it bothers you. Not because you expect life to always feel good, but because you sense how disconnected you've become from your own reactions. You start realizing that your energy doesn't come from being around people. It comes from feeling real around them. And when that stops happening, even the best relationships can leave you feeling strangely alone. Not because anything is wrong, but because the part of you that wants to be emotionally seen is still waiting behind the version of you that's easier to understand. That's where the split begins between the version of you that others know and the version of you that rarely gets to speak. You don't hide it intentionally. You've just learned that it doesn't always land, that when you do show it, it often gets misread or it complicates things. So you keep it tucked away, telling yourself it's not necessary right now. But over time, that split wears on you. You become tired in a different way, not physically, not socially, but emotionally. like a part of you has been standing still while the rest of your life moves forward. And when you finally slow down enough to notice, you don't feel like you're in the center of your own experience anymore. You're watching it happen from just outside of it. This isn't about isolation, it's about disconnection. The kind that builds up slowly, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that lives in the pauses between what you feel and what you say, between what you need and what you allow yourself to want. And the longer you live in that space, the more normal it starts to feel. You begin to forget what emotional ease felt like. You stop expecting to be surprised by joy or deeply moved by something simple. You lower the volume on your own longings because they seem out of place in a life that functions just fine without them. But functioning isn't the same as fulfillment. And you know this, even when it's hard to name. You feel it in the way you start going quiet in conversations, in the way you delay replying to people you actually care about, in the way you hesitate to hope for more because you don't want to be disappointed again. That's what loneliness does over time. It doesn't just hurt, it changes how you expect the world to respond to you. You stop reaching, you stop asking, you shrink your experience down to what feels manageable, and in doing so you begin to disappear. Not from others, but from yourself. But here's what matters. The part of you that feels all of this is still intact. It hasn't left. It hasn't been erased. It's just waiting. Not for someone else to fix it, but for you to stop walking past it. And maybe tonight or sometime soon you will. Maybe you'll pause just long enough to notice what you've been carrying without support. Not to dramatize it, not to solve it, just to admit it's there. That you've felt alone in ways you haven't had the words for, that your own inner world has been in the background for too long, and in that moment, even without anyone else around, the loneliness starts to shift. Because now, at least, you're with yourself again. One of the most important things to understand is that emotional loneliness doesn't always want to be solved. It wants to be understood. When you treat it like a problem to fix, you often end up pushing it further away. You analyze it, explain it, try to talk yourself out of it. But it doesn't respond to logic. It responds to recognition. And recognition isn't about overthinking. It's about being honest enough to say, I feel disconnected right now. I don't fully know why, but I know this feeling is real. That small sentence can be a turning point. Not because it makes the feeling go away, but because it names something you've been silently living with. There's a kind of strength in that, the kind that doesn't look like strength from the outside. No one applauds it, no one sees it. But internally, something shifts. The pressure to pretend is reduced. The distance between you and your own experience gets smaller. And suddenly you're not alone with the feeling. You're alone in the feeling, and that's different. Being in it means you're no longer avoiding it. You're allowing it. You're making room for it without judgment. And that quietly creates space for other things to emerge. Compassion, memory, clarity, maybe even softness. You may start to notice where the loneliness lives in your daily life. Not just at night, not just when things are quiet, but in the in-between moments. When you're surrounded by people but feel far away. When you're praised for something but it doesn't land. When you're needed but not really known. These are the places where emotional resonance is missing. The places where you show up but don't feel felt. The places where presence exists but not intimacy. And it's not about anyone doing something wrong. It's about the small ways we all learn to limit how much of ourselves we bring into the room. And sometimes the people around you only know the version you've let them see. Not because you've been hiding, but because you've been protecting. Protecting your energy, your time, your emotions. Because being misunderstood too many times teaches you to reduce yourself before anyone else does. But what you reduce doesn't disappear, it waits. It waits for moments when you feel safe enough or tired enough to let it come forward. And those moments, even when they feel raw or uncomfortable, are often where reconnection begins. You don't have to share everything with everyone. You don't have to open up fully just because you feel unseen. But you do owe it to yourself to listen, to stop minimizing the voice inside you that says, something isn't landing, I'm here, but I don't feel met. That voice is not self-pity, it's not weakness, it's your inner system noticing that something vital has been missing for a while. And the more often you allow that voice to speak without rushing to fix it or reframe it, the more your emotional life becomes honest again. And when your emotional life is honest, even in private, you feel less alone. Because now you're no longer asking for something you're not willing to give yourself. You're no longer waiting for others to make you feel visible. You're becoming visible to yourself. And that, even quietly, even slowly, is where the loneliness begins to loosen. When you've carried this kind of loneliness for a long time, you start to build your life around it without even noticing. You make decisions that protect you from further disconnection. You choose relationships that feel safe, even if they don't feel deep. You stay in conversations that are comfortable, even when they don't move you. You stop expecting surprise, depth, or intensity, and you tell yourself that's maturity. But underneath all of that, something still longs for more. Not more people, not more noise, but more truth, more clarity, more feltness. And when that longing doesn't go away, you may start to think something is wrong with you. Like maybe you're too sensitive, too introspective, too emotional. But that's not it. What's really happening is that your emotional system still believes in connection. It hasn't shut down. It's just been quieted. And when something is quieted for too long, it starts to feel like absence, like a blank space where something meaningful used to live. That blankness doesn't scream. It doesn't cry out. It just sits there, like a room you stopped going into, even though it's still yours. Sometimes the smallest things can bring you back to that room. A line in a book, a tone in someone's voice, a moment of silence that feels unexpectedly safe. And when that happens, you feel it immediately. That sense of, oh, there I am. Not because something big has changed, but because something inside you finally had space to reappear. That's the thing about emotional truth. It doesn't need a stage, it just needs room. And when it gets that room, even briefly, the loneliness begins to break apart. Not vanish, but shift. Because now your emotional self is not buried under performance. It's breathing again. And maybe that's what you've been needing, not just to be around others, but to be around yourself more fully, to hear your own voice without editing it, to let your reactions be what they are, even when they're not convenient or polished. That kind of honesty doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's as small as admitting, I'm not actually okay right now. Or I've been missing something and I didn't want to say it out loud. These moments don't fix everything, but they open the door. And that's often the hardest part, finding your way back to the door. You might feel hesitant. You might worry that speaking your truth will push people away, that it will complicate things, that it will make you look weak. But if the cost of being accepted is hiding who you are, that's not connection, that's performance, and you've done enough of that. You don't need to perform to be worthy of closeness. You don't need to manage your truth to make others comfortable. The people who can meet you in your realness, even if they're few, are worth far more than the ones who only know your surface. And the more you return to yourself in quiet moments, the more your life begins to reshape itself around that truth. The spaces you choose, the words you speak, the way you show up. It all starts to feel more solid, more yours. And as that happens, the loneliness doesn't disappear, but it becomes something else. A reminder of what matters. A signal that you've gone too long without real contact. A call to return not to others first, but to the version of you that has been waiting all along. As you begin to come back to yourself, even in small ways, something unexpected might happen. You may notice grief. Not loud, not overwhelming, but there. A quiet ache that lives just underneath the surface, and you might not understand it at first. Nothing dramatic has changed, no major loss, no sudden shift. So why the sadness? Because returning to yourself often means finally feeling what you've been carrying all this time. And sometimes what you've been carrying is the weight of not being fully seen. The years of smiling through disconnection. The moments of silence that were never safe enough to rest in. The emotional truths that stayed locked inside, waiting for someone to ask the right question, and never hearing it. Grief doesn't always arrive with tears. Sometimes it arrives as fatigue, as tenderness, as a softness you forgot you had. You may feel slower, quieter, not because you're shutting down, but because something is finally letting go. That kind of grief doesn't need to be fixed. It just needs space. It's the body's way of saying, I'm still here, I've always been here, and now that you've come back, I can stop holding everything alone. You don't need to rush past that part. You don't need to explain it. Just allow it to be there. Let the quiet expand around it. Let the feeling move through without trying to make it tidy. Emotional clarity is often messy at first. You think you're making progress, and you are. But progress doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels like exhaustion, like truth finally catching up to you, and then in time you begin to feel a little more open, a little more present, not because everything has been resolved, but because you're no longer pushing it down. The resistance fades, the self-monitoring quiets. You stop managing your inner world like a project and start listening to it like a person. That's where emotional aliveness begins again, not in dramatic breakthroughs, but in ordinary moments that suddenly feel full again. A familiar street that feels more vivid. A voice that resonates more deeply. A moment alone that feels peaceful, not empty. And slowly you begin to rebuild. Not a different life, not a different self, but a different way of being inside all of it. A way that includes you, the whole you, not just the version that's been edited for survival. People around you may not notice the change. They might still see the same face, hear the same words, but you'll know because something will feel less distant. The silence inside you won't echo the same way. The world may still feel loud and fast and incomplete, but you won't be as absent from it. You'll be in the room again, in your body, in your feelings, in your life, not performing it, not protecting it, not managing it, just living in it. That doesn't mean the loneliness is gone, but now you're not lost in it. You're aware of it. You're with it. You've returned. And in that return, something begins to soften, not because you found every answer, but because you've stopped pretending you didn't have any questions. There's something powerful in simply being able to name what's been unnamed for so long. To say, I've been here the whole time, but not really living inside myself. That sentence might never be spoken out loud. No one around you may ever hear it. But when it lands in your own awareness, it changes things. It doesn't need to come with a plan. You don't need to turn it into action. Just acknowledging that truth, gently, honestly, creates space where before there was only compression. Because living disconnected from yourself takes effort. It requires you to constantly translate your experience into something acceptable, something manageable, something small enough to carry without causing disruption. But your full self was never meant to be folded that way. It's not fragile, but it is alive. And anything alive resists being made too quiet for too long. That resistance doesn't always show up clearly. It comes as irritation, as distance, as a sense that you're tired but can't name why. It shows up when you're with people you care about and still feel far away. It shows up when you get everything done and still feel incomplete. And then, in moments of quiet, it shows up as longing. Not dramatic, just that soft, familiar pull, the one that says something's missing, even if the room is full and the day went well. That feeling isn't a problem. It's a signal. And when you stop trying to silence it, you begin to hear what it's been trying to say. I miss being real. I miss being full. I miss being home in myself. That kind of honesty is quiet but transformative. It makes you less reactive, less driven by distraction, less dependent on being mirrored by others. Because once you begin to reconnect from within, you stop needing the outside to prove that you exist. You may still want connection, of course you will. You're human. But now you're not chasing it to confirm your worth. You're seeking it as a reflection of something you've already begun to give yourself. And that changes everything. Now, when loneliness shows up, and it still might, you meet it differently. You don't panic. You don't rush to fill the space. You sit with it. You say, yes, I know you. You've been here before, but I'm here now too. And that response, simple as it may sound, is where the power is. Because what really softens loneliness isn't distraction or even company. It's presence. Not just the presence of others, but your own. When you are fully with yourself, even for a few minutes at a time, you start to feel less lost, less waiting, less missing, more steady, more known. Not by the world, but by you. What surprises many people is that the most meaningful shift often happens before anything in the outside world changes. Before the conversations, before the breakthroughs, before the connection is restored. The shift begins inside, quietly, privately, when you stop abandoning your own experience, even when it's uncomfortable. It happens when you start noticing how often you interrupt yourself before you feel too much. How often you soften the truth to avoid friction. How often you stay quiet, not because there's nothing to say, but because you're too used to not being heard the way you need to be. When that awareness grows, it doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels worse before it feels better. Because once you realize how long you've been living slightly outside of yourself, you might grieve the time you lost. You might feel anger or sadness or regret. Let it come. That's part of the process too. You can feel frustrated without being stuck. You can feel lost without being broken. You can feel heavy without being hopeless. The body knows how to move through these states, especially once you stop denying them. The longer you resist them, the longer they stay static. But once you let them breathe, they begin to change. You might find that your loneliness is not a single emotion, but a mix of many quiet ones: disappointment, fear, longing, even love that had nowhere to go. These feelings don't always need to be expressed outwardly. Sometimes they just need to be felt, fully and without shame. And in doing so, you begin to widen the emotional space inside yourself. The pressure softens. You no longer need to explain away your inner world. You no longer need to justify why you feel what you feel. You're not asking permission anymore. You're offering presence. From that place, connection with others starts to feel different. You don't need them to fix your feelings. You just want them to meet you in them, to listen without solving, to see you without interpreting, to sit with you without needing to adjust the moment. These are the kinds of connections that truly dissolve loneliness, not because they remove all solitude, but because they restore meaning to it. They remind you that solitude isn't always emptiness. It can also be depth, clarity, even healing. But that meaning only grows when you begin with yourself. When you meet your own loneliness not as a failure, but as a sign that something still matters. That your need for truth, for closeness, for resonance is still alive. And if that need is alive, then you are too. Not just in function, not just in appearance, but in feeling. And that's the part of you that doesn't want to be managed. It wants to be met. It wants to be real. It wants to come home. You don't have to rebuild everything at once. You don't need to rewrite your life or change the people around you. The return to yourself is not a performance. It's a quiet shift, a subtle change in the way you show up. Not louder, not more dramatic, just more honest. It might start with simple moments. You stop agreeing when something doesn't feel right. You pause before answering, not to be distant, but to be real. You let silence be part of the conversation instead of filling it to keep things comfortable. These are not big acts, but they are powerful ones. They send a message to your own system. I'm allowed to be here, just as I am. And the more often you send that message, the more the loneliness begins to soften. Because much of what makes loneliness so painful is the feeling that your real self has no place, that your full experience is too much, or too invisible, or too complicated to bring forward. But when you begin to make room for that self, even if no one else notices right away, you're already changing the emotional landscape. You're making your inner world a place that welcomes you, not a place that edits you. That's what begins to dissolve the deeper kind of loneliness. Not more people, not more attention, but more permission, more presence, more truth. Even if it's messy or quiet or incomplete, you may still feel alone at times. That doesn't go away completely. But what does change is the quality of the solitude. It no longer feels like exile, it feels like space, a place where you can land, where you can hear yourself again. And once that inner space begins to feel safe, everything else becomes more bearable. Conversations feel more open. Disappointments hurt less. Joy reaches you more easily. Because now you're not filtering every emotion through the question, is this allowed? You already know that it is. There's no final arrival point. You won't wake up one day and feel perfectly whole forever. But you will notice the difference. You'll notice when you're slipping back into self-editing. You'll notice when you're performing closeness again instead of feeling it. And instead of pushing through, you'll pause. You'll adjust. You'll return. That's the rhythm of healing, not constant progress, just steady return, over and over again. Back to your own voice, back to your own truth, back to the place where loneliness doesn't mean something is wrong. It just means something important is ready to be felt again. There will still be days when the feeling returns, not because you've done something wrong, not because you're going backward, but because your system remembers. It remembers how long you lived in silence, how often you softened your voice just to be heard, how many moments you shaped yourself to fit spaces that never made space for you. That memory isn't weakness, it's sensitivity. And sensitivity is not something to escape. It's a sign that your emotional life is awake, that your connection to the world hasn't been shut down, even if it's been quiet for a while. So when that ache returns, that quiet, unexplained loneliness, you can meet it differently now. You don't have to solve it. You don't have to run from it. You can sit with it calmly, gently, like something familiar. Because it is familiar. But it's not dangerous. Not anymore. You've made space for it now. You've stopped denying its presence. And in doing that, you've removed some of its power. It no longer defines you. It no longer decides how you speak or move or connect. It's just one part of your experience, a reminder, not a verdict. And over time, it becomes less sharp, less constant, less like something, pressing in on you, and more like a signal that simply says, stay close to yourself. Don't drift. Don't go silent again. Don't become invisible in the name of being understood. You may notice that the way you connect begins to change too, not in quantity, but in tone. You don't need endless conversations. You need true ones. Ones where you don't have to translate your emotions into something easier for someone else to hold. Ones where your pauses aren't misread, where your depth isn't inconvenient, where your silence isn't mistaken for absence. And if those moments are rare, they're still real, they're still worth it. Even one honest connection can change the emotional temperature of your whole life. Not because it fills every gap, but because it reminds you that you're not impossible to meet. That you don't have to hide everything to be loved. That you don't have to be light and easy to be worth staying close to. That truth, even if it only lands once, stays with you. It makes the quiet feel less empty. It makes the wait feel less endless. It makes you feel less alone with the part of you that still hopes. And that hope, no matter how quiet, no matter how tired, is something to protect. The most important thing to remember is that this feeling, the kind of loneliness that doesn't come with a clear reason, is not proof that something is wrong with you. It's not a failure. It's not a weakness. It's not a sign that you're broken or behind or missing some essential skill that others seem to have. It's a signal, a quiet one. A signal that you've lived too long without enough emotional truth. That your life has carried on while a part of you stood still. That you've learned to move through the world in ways that protect you, but don't fully include you, and now you've noticed. That's the beginning of everything. Because awareness isn't passive. Once you become aware of what's been missing, of how you've been leaving yourself behind, it gets harder to keep doing it. You start listening more closely to your own signals. You start noticing when you're performing connection instead of feeling it. You start returning to yourself gently, imperfectly, consistently. You speak a little more honestly. You let silence stretch a little longer. You stop reaching for the version of yourself that's easier to explain and start living from the version that's simply true. even when it doesn't make sense to anyone else. That version doesn't ask to be perfect. It doesn't need to be joyful all the time. It doesn't demand resolution. It just wants to be part of your life again. And when you let that happen, when you make space for the quiet parts, the complicated parts, the emotionally layered parts, you begin to feel more real, even if nothing on the outside changes, even if you still have hard days, even if no one else fully understands, because now you do. And that understanding, that steady, quiet recognition of your own inner world is often enough to make everything feel different. Not fixed, not complete, but different, more grounded, more honest, more like you. And as you rest now, or simply sit with your thoughts, you don't need to do anything more. You've already done something meaningful just by listening, just by letting the feeling exist, just by not pushing it away. It doesn't need to be solved tonight. It just needed space, and you gave it that. Good night. Sleep well.